Chapter 21, Visitors Near and Far. The morning sun had barely begun to make its way up into the clear blue sky, creeping slowly above the eastern tree line around the village, as Caleb began to open his eyes and greet the morning. Yawning as he turned over in his cot, he lay quietly watching the sunlight as it streamed through one of the small windows on the east side of Miss Chelina's main room. For a little while as he lay there, he was able to enjoy the peace and quiet of the morning. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a distant thundering sound of what would turn out to be several dozen riders on horseback rapidly approaching the village from the south. Caleb sat up when he heard what sounded like a pack of wild coyotes yelping in the distance. Nico was the first to jump up out of his cot, followed quickly by Caleb. "What's going on, Nico?" Caleb asked, sitting up in his cot rubbing his eyes. "I'm not sure, but that doesn't sound good," said Nico, quickly changing out of his bed linens and into his regular clothes. Caleb almost felt as if he were still at home, in a tent, sleeping in one of their old cots. Caleb, still sitting up in his cot, was watching in amusement as Nico was rapidly changing. He reminded Caleb a lot of his brother Stephen in many ways, and now without all his colorful hunting makeup on, Caleb nearly thought he was looking at his brother Stephen as he was getting dressed. "What are you staring at?" Nico asked, not in a sarcastic way, but in a more curious one. "I was just thinking how you look so different without your face paint on," observed Caleb, somewhat sheepishly. "When we first met you, I thought maybe you wore it all the time," he said, still rubbing his eyes. Nico laughed. It was the first time Caleb had seen Nico laugh. "Of course not, only warriors wear it, or if we are on lookout duty out in the woods. The paint helps you to blend into the trees, like yesterday when we found the three of you by the river. Normally, we don't wear it." Caleb nodded. "I see. Could you show me how to do that sometime to my face?" "Only if you can shoot an arrow, climb a tree, and hit a dove at 50 paces, teased Nico, somewhat jokingly. Caleb nodded his head again. "I think I could do that," he said, playing along. Nico began laughing again. "Maybe later, my friend. Right now I have to go see what all the excitement is about," he said, continuing to get dressed. Before Caleb realized it, Nico was running out the front door of Miss Chelina's. "I'll be back in a few minutes," he said, shutting the door quickly behind him. Caleb took the opportunity to finish getting himself dressed, and as soon as he was finished, he went over to the largest front window, looking out to see what the commotion was. Pulling back the curtain slightly, he could see several dozen men still on horseback, about 2 or 3 houses away from Ms. Chelina's. They were talking to a large group of other men, who had just come out of the third house. Caleb strained his eyes and realized that all the men who had ridden in on the horses earlier had their faces painted just like Nico did yesterday afternoon. However, these men also were carrying bows and arrows around their shoulders and large knives strapped onto the sides of their horses. He then saw Nico running over to join with the group of men in front of the house. It was too far away for Caleb to catch the details of their conversation, but he could tell something had them all on edge. The sound of a door opening behind him startled him. "Good morning. Would you like some tea?" asked Miss Chelina as she came strolling out of her bedroom and walked into her kitchen, seemingly unalarmed by all the commotion outside. Startled, Caleb turned around, quickly dropping the curtain. "Please, yes, that sounds great," he said, double-checking to make sure that he had indeed gotten dressed. Chelina continued talking from her kitchen. "I'll bet all of you are hungry too," continued Chelina. "You like pancakes?" she asked from the kitchen. "I love them. My mom makes them all the time." Chelina stuck her head out of the kitchen doorway. "Yes, but does she make them with fresh strawberries?" asked Chelina, chuckling to herself as she returned to the kitchen. Caleb could hear metal pots and pans being readied. "She seems to be in a good mood this morning," thought Caleb. Caleb returned to the window once again to look out. Now he could see that there were more riders who had joined in with the others, bringing the total count to nearly 24 men. "Caleb, can you tell what's going on out there?" Chelina hollered from the kitchen. "It must be something to get all those men whooping and hollering like that first thing in the morning. I know how men love to get all worked up, but usually not this early in the morning," she said. "I'm not sure. Nico went to go talk to them a few minutes ago. He said he would be right back, replied Caleb, still looking out the window. Hi Caleb, did you sleep all right last night? Asked Martha, who had just stepped out of Miss Chelina's room, startling Caleb. Caleb started to laugh as soon as he saw Martha. She was dressed in sleep clothes that were obviously borrowed from Miss Chelina, since they were way too large for her. I slept just fine. Miss Chelina's making us pancakes for breakfast, said Caleb, returning again to the window. With fresh strawberries, exclaimed Chelina loudly from the kitchen. What's going on out there? Asked Martha. Not sure yet. A bunch of the men rode in on horses a few minutes ago, and something's going on that seems to have them all excited, observed Caleb. Nico went over there a few minutes ago to see what was going on. Have you checked on Peter yet this morning? Martha asked. No, not yet, replied Caleb, feeling slightly guilty for not checking on him earlier. Martha turned and went into the medical room to see Peter sitting up in his bed, bent over examining his leg. Hey there, Peter, how are you feeling this morning? Asked Martha. I'm feeling much better. Boy, did I had some strange dreams last night, said Peter, continuing to examine his leg and the strange dried-up mixture that was still lying across his leg. Caleb, who had just come through the door, started to smirk and then stopped himself. Yeah, Peter, tell me about your strange dreams, he teased. Hi, Caleb, it's good to see you too. So, can either one of you tell me what's going on? Peter asked, pointing to his leg. And what is this stuff on my leg? He asked. It's called a poultice. It's used to help draw out the venom. Miss Chelina showed me how to make it up last night, and we put it on your leg, explained Martha proudly. Martha began to go over all the details of the events of the last several hours to Peter, the snake bite at the river, which Peter remembered all too well, then getting help from Nico and his friends, the trip to the Cherokee village, meeting Nico's Aunt Chelina. She continued until they heard the front door opening and closing again, and Caleb motioned for Martha to wait. It's a long story, Peter, as you can see. We'll fill you in on the rest after some breakfast later, okay? Caleb offered. I think Nico's back. I'm going to go see what's happening, said Caleb, turning quickly to leave the room. What's he all worried about? Peter whispered to Martha. I don't know. Something's going on in the village, and Nico went to go find out. Do you know if our parents know where we are? Peter asked nervously. I wouldn't think so, Peter. We were hoping you might feel better this morning, so we could all head back home and let them know what happened, explained a hopeful Martha. I guess that will all depend on how you feel, said Martha, trying to sound encouraging. Peter nodded. I'm feeling much better, and I'm hungry too, he laughed. The Elgin camp had been a flurry of activity all morning long, ever since late yesterday evening when the alert had gone out about the 3 missing children and the search had begun throughout the entire camp, with everyone available looking for any signs of the whereabouts of Caleb, Martha, and Peter. To make matters even worse, the expeditionary team with most of the fathers and older brothers were overdue in their return this morning. As the sun came up on the Daniels house, Mary Daniels, Gina Rickton, Rebecca, and Sarah Elgin, and several of the search team were found sitting nervously at the table in the Daniels kitchen, trying to coordinate all possible theories of where their 3 children might be. Rebecca Elgin seemed to be having the most difficult time keeping calm, while Gina and Sarah busied themselves trying to follow every possible lead and scenario. Rebecca, it'll be okay. The men should be returning very soon. Maybe, like Sarah said, the kids got lost and ran into the team last night and they kept them with them overnight, insisted Gina, trying her best to calm Rebecca down as she continued sobbing intermittently. That would even explain why they are late, offered Sarah, who sat next to Rebecca, rubbing her back. I know, I just would feel better if Elijah were here, that's all, sobbed Rebecca. Mary, who was busy readying more hot water for tea and coffee, came up and stood behind Rebecca. Look, Rebecca, those 3 kids are the smartest kids I know. I am sure that they are fine, and that there is a reasonable explanation to whatever has happened to them, said Mary, doing her best to ease her nerves. Footsteps could be heard coming from outside, as Kurt Miller and Zeke Daniels stepped through the door. They had just finished searching along the northern riverbank to the east and west for the last several hours. As Kurt reached the kitchen area where everyone was gathered, he and Zeke stopped abruptly. "Well?" asked Sarah, impatient to break the silence. Kurt shook his head. "Nothing. We found their tracks up along the river to the northeast, by the bridge, and then we followed them for about a mile or two, and then they just disappeared," insisted Kurt, still shaking his head. "What do you mean disappeared?" barked Gina, also beginning to show signs of frustration. "It was probably the rain we had yesterday evening, Gina. Since they were following the river, the rain must have erased some of the tracks in the mud," explained Kurt. "Would you like some coffee, Kurt?" offered Mary, who had Elsa and Beatrice helping her ready some biscuits on the stove. "I hope everyone is hungry. We have a batch of biscuits just about ready," she added. "Yes, I would, thanks." There was silence in the room, as everyone seemed to be gathering their thoughts, or perhaps it was just that they were all tired from the constant searching all morning long. Suddenly, in the distance could be heard several horses approaching the Daniels camp. "They're back," shouted Zeke, running out the door as fast as he could, along with several of the others who had been waiting inside the Daniels kitchen. Uriah, Elijah, and Joseph were riding in the lead of the group as they approached the Daniels camp and saw Zeke running out of the house, followed by dozens of others running behind him. "Hey Joseph, I think they missed us," joked Uriah, as he saw the group running out of the house. "Yeah, a day or two away, and you'd think it was an eternity," chuckled Joseph, then noticing Rebecca Elgin and several others following behind Zeke. Joseph turned to Elijah. "You too, I guess?" "It would seem so," muttered Elijah, beginning to sense there was something else going on here. "I don't think they're happy to see us after all." He paused. "Something's wrong," observed Elijah, who could see Rebecca stop for a second, as Gina and Sarah had their hands around her shoulders. "What's the matter now?" Elijah thought, showing some inner frustration growing. Zeke was the first to reach the group as they neared the house. "Boy, are we glad to see you guys get back early," Zeke said. "Well, to be honest, Zeke, we were planning to stay out longer than this, but the weather turned bad on us yesterday and well, to be honest, we got lost." Elijah explained. "So what's going on here? Why does everyone look so worried?" he asked. "Peter, Caleb, and Martha are missing. Have you seen them?" Zeke explained, who was beginning to wheeze a bit from the excitement. The three men stopped their horses next to Zeke, followed behind by the rest of the team. "What that you say, Zeke?" asked Elijah, seeing that Zeke was having a hard time catching his breath. He saw Kurt Miller behind him. "Kurt, what's going on?" "The kids are missing, Caleb, Martha, and Peter. Since yesterday afternoon, the last we knew, they were going fishing up by the bridge, but they never made it back home. We've been looking for them since late yesterday afternoon. We were all hoping that maybe they ran into you up north somewhere," explained Kurt. Elijah, Uriah, and Joseph stepped down from their horses, tying them up on the garden fence as the others gathered around the group. For the next few minutes, there was a barrage of conversations, greetings, and tears as the group slowly made their way back to the Daniels house as Kurt, Gina, and the others filled them in on all that had transpired over the last day. Finally, Elijah put his hand up to quiet everyone. "Okay, well, have the boys get all the horses fed and watered, and take a few minutes to rest," motioned Elijah to Stephen and the others, "while we go in and plan where to search next," barked Elijah. Nico had stepped inside the door of Chelina's house and stopped suddenly as he noticed Caleb and Chelina both staring at him. "Well, Nico, tell us, what's going on? We all want to know," asked Chelina, wiping her wet hands on her apron. Nico hesitated at first. Uncle Gray Eagle said there was a large party of men that had been spotted this morning, moving down along the southern border, all on horseback. Nico started to explain, then he hesitated again. Caleb interrupted, thinking that perhaps this group could be from the one from his camp. "How many men were there, Nico? Our group has had an expeditionary team of about a dozen riders that has been out for the last few days just north of here," explained Caleb. "Maybe it was them they spotted." "Are you sure, Caleb?" "There was about 20 or more of them, and they all had rifles," said Nico nervously. "Rifles?" echoed Caleb and Chelina. Well, we certainly don't have any rifles in our group, said Caleb. Was there a problem? Was anyone hurt? Chelina asked. No, but I just heard my Uncle Charlie say that they're sending out a larger group of armed men, warriors, to go and intercept them and keep an eye on them, just in case they cross back into our territory, explained Nico. I better get you kids fed right away then. Come on in, Nico, and sit down and have some pancakes. They are just about ready, offered Chelina. Caleb, how is your friend Peter doing? She asked. He's doing just fine, answered Martha, as she and Peter walked into the main room, with Peter holding onto Martha's shoulder for support. Miss Chelina, your medicine is working great, said Martha. Well, I'd say you are looking a lot better this morning, said Chelina, smiling and taking a closer look at Peter's leg. So, how does it feel? It's just a little sore, but other than that, I feel pretty good, thank you for helping me, said Peter, wiggling his leg around. And I'm a little hungry too, so whatever you're cooking in there sure smells good. Chelina laughed. All right then, let's get everyone some food, and then we'll see about trying to help you get back home this morning, said Chelina, returning to the kitchen. 5 more minutes and it'll be ready, she shouted from the kitchen. It had been nearly an hour since the group of warriors had left the camp. Everyone had eaten their fill of pancakes and Nico and Caleb had been busy getting the horses readied for the trip back to the Elgin camp. Nico had decided it might be good to have some help, so he invited his brother Little Bear and his friend Will to go along with them. Chelina had finished cleaning up the kitchen, with help from Martha, and had now decided that she too would like to make the trip to the Elgin camp with them. At least she felt it might be good to have an adult along with them, to explain things to all the parents, and Chelina was never one to pass up an opportunity to meet new people. Sarah looked up into the late morning sky and realized how deceptively beautiful it could be. With the combination of the deep blue sky above and the inviting warmth of an early fall morning, it was easy to be lulled into a sense of complacency. If it weren't, however, for the fact that 3 of their precious children were now missing and there was no explanation as to what had happened. Everyone in the clan began to feel a growing sense of dread as to what might have possibly happened. Sarah, Gina, and Rebecca sat on the porch of the Daniels home, waiting, as Uriah, Elijah, and Joseph Daniels, along with several of the older boys, spent the better part of the morning searching nonstop up and down the river for any signs of the missing 3, and every time they returned empty-handed, the mother's hope began to slowly fade. Elijah had been doing his best all morning to keep positive about the situation, but Rebecca hadn't been making it easy for him. When around the other mothers, Rebecca would do her best to keep up the brave appearances, keeping quiet about her true feelings. Privately, when alone with Elijah, she would bemoan the others, placing the blame of events solely on Caleb Elgin, as well as Sarah and Uriah for the feeling that they had spoiled him and allowed him too much freedom. They should be back in a few minutes, mumbled Gina. It's just about noon. I'm surprised they haven't found anything yet. Rebecca had been quiet all morning, partly because she was at a loss for words, but mostly because she was simply all cried out. Sarah and Gina did their best to console her and keep her focused on a positive outcome, while inside they all felt the same. Sarah had hoped that this event might provide an opportunity for the 3 of them to grow a little closer with each other, but she could sense from Rebecca that she was blaming her for some reason for what was happening. Sarah was just about to get up and go inside the Daniels' house to help Mary, who was busy as usual, fixing food for everyone on their return. How does she do it? Sarah wondered to herself, shaking her head as she looked up the southeast trail and noticed a group of riders approaching from a distance. Sarah quickly stood up and gazed out, squinting her eyes tightly, since the distance was beyond her ability to focus clearly on the faces of the riders. Hey Gina, look, insisted Sarah. Your eyes are better than mine. Can you see who's coming? I know it's not the men. Gina arose and slowly walked out to the trail to get a better look. Whoever it was, they were still some distance away. Gina continued to stare for a minute or two, with one hand shading the sun, and then she turned around and gave Sarah and Rebecca a huge grin. It's the kids, and it looks they've brought some company. Gina cheered as she began running off down the road. Caleb, I think someone has seen us. Look up the trail ahead, said Nico, who had spotted the three women running to meet them. As the distance closed between the two, Caleb motioned for the group to stop as they all dismounted. That's my mom, yelled Peter, and it's your mom too, Caleb. Gina was the first to reach the riders as she began waving her arms around in the air. Peter. Caleb, Martha. You're all right. We've been worried sick about you. Where have you been? Gina yelled, running up first to Peter and giving him a huge kiss and hug as she continued to Martha and Caleb. Sarah and Rebecca were following close behind her, doing the same thing, asking all the same questions. Caleb, Martha, and Peter were so busy trying to explain the details of everything that happened that they nearly forgot to introduce their guests. Caleb held his hand up in the air, doing his best to pause the conversation. Wait, everybody, I almost forgot. I'd like you all to meet some friends we made, Miss Chelina Ward and her nephew Nico Ward. His younger brother Little Bear and their friend Wilwadi, said Caleb, as he then pointed out each one and turned to his mother, then Gina Rickton and Rebecca Elgin. Chelina stepped forward to greet Sarah. It's so nice to meet you, Sarah. I must tell you that you should all be so proud of these three. They handled the whole situation very well. I've been very impressed with all of them, insisted Chelina, looking at each of them as she spoke. Gina and Sarah also stepped forward and continued speaking with Chelina, while Rebecca stood quietly at a distance for several minutes just staring at the others as they continued to share the events of the last day. Martha, said Rebecca, tell everyone goodbye. We're going home right now, she ordered, as the others stopped in mid-conversation, with looks of surprise on their faces. But Mother, you haven't even heard about everything that happened. You haven't even given me a chance to tell you about, Martha began to explain, getting immediately cut off by her mother. I don't want to know about that right now. I just want to go home, insisted Rebecca, seemingly frustrated, as well as uncomfortable with the situation. Yes, Mother, Martha muttered in a low voice, as she exchanged worried glances with Caleb and Chelina before turning to head back down the trail to her house. Rebecca, I can assure you that your daughter, Martha, was the perfect lady. Martha, Caleb, and Peter all handled themselves very well, given the uncertainty of the whole situation, explained Chelina, trying to ease any of Rebecca's possible fears. Rebecca made no reply, only a stare of disbelief mixed with frustration, as she grabbed Martha's arm and nudged her in the direction of home. Rebecca stopped quickly, as if she was about to say something, and then turned back around again to leave. Chelina started to say something more to Rebecca, as Sarah and Gina each reached out and gently placed a hand on Chelina's shoulders. She'll be okay, Chelina. I think she's been under a lot of stress the last several hours worrying about Martha, said Sarah, speaking softly. Chelina nodded. There was an unusual quiet in the group for a few minutes, as everyone watched Rebecca and Martha walking the trail slowly back to the house. Occasionally, Martha would turn around for a shy glance backwards at Caleb and the others, and then Rebecca would nudge her back. Suddenly, the sound of several riders approaching from behind them broke the silence, as the group turned to see who it was. Dad, hollered Caleb, cupping his hands over his mouth, seeing his father Uriah and his brother in the lead of the group. The greetings, hugs, and explanations repeated once again for several minutes after all the riders dismounted, with only Elijah remaining on his horse, glancing around everywhere, seemingly little confused. Gina noticed Elijah's frustrated expression. Elijah, you should probably head on to your house. That is where Rebecca and Martha went just a few minutes ago, before you arrived, she said softly. Elijah bent over to speak. How did she take it? He asked. Gina grimaced slightly. Not very well, I'd say. Martha handled it well, though. Elijah nodded and smiled a little. Thanks, Gina. I want to thank you and Sarah for helping her through all of this. It has been hard for her. Elijah turned and headed down the trail to his house. By this time, Mary Daniels had also joined with the group and was making the round of introductions with all the new visitors. Well, I have to say we are all very happy to meet you, Chelina, as well as all your boys. I have 2 big pots of potato stew that I've been cooking on the stove, and it's ready for all who's hungry, said Mary, looking around at everyone. There's plenty for everyone, so come on inside and bring your appetites. That's all I need to know. Let's all go eat, barked Joseph, gently nudging the others in the direction of the house. Seth, would you and Stephen take care of the horses for us, and don't worry, we'll be sure to save enough for you too.
You have been listening to Caleb Elgin, The Rise of the Clans by David E. Farmer. Also available on Amazon Kindle. More chapters coming soon. Thank you for listening. Have a great day. Bye-bye.